The Navy is aware that when things heat up at sea, they heat up very fast, and you have the potential to lose hundreds of people in minutes. It goes from 0 to 100% in the blink of an eye.
I just wonder if perhaps the Iranian response has actually caught everyone out.
I can tell you with 100% certainty where they would not have been making any of those mistakes, because every month for 3 years, and we absolutely war-gamed all of these scenarios to death.
What do you think could we have deployed, whether the submarine or other assets? And what do you think the sluggishness in regard to their deployment, what ill effect has it led us to sustain in the region?
Yeah, I mean, there are a handful of things we could have done more quickly. The submarine should never have gone out of the Gulf of Oman, in my view.
I mean, just from the outside, it seems pretty woeful and embarrassing.
Yeah, I think it is embarrassing. The stuff we have is really good. And of course, the people we have that run this stuff are still brilliant.
Like, we've got the 5th biggest budget in the world, and yet we can't even get 2 ships down to the Gulf. Where's the money going?
We are unbelievably wasteful. I mean, it's off the scale.
All boils down to the fact that nobody ever really thinks that we're ever going to have to use our armed forces.
We've got to recalibrate here. Historically, that only happens when the worst thing happened.
Hello, and thank you for joining us on The Brink. I'm Andrew Fox.
And I'm Jake Wallace-Simons. Now, with the Iran war raging, our guest today is the former Royal Navy commander and military analyst, Tom Sharpe, OBE.
Tom spent more than 25 years in the Royal Navy, much of it at sea commanding warships. Over the course of his career, he commanded 4 vessels, including the Royal Navy's ice patrol ship in Antarctica, where he was awarded the OBE after helping save the ship during a serious onboard flood. His operational career also included commanding a frigate in the Persian Gulf, where he served as an anti-submarine warfare commander for 2 US carrier battle groups, as well as contributing to the protection of the United Kingdom's nuclear deterrent.
In the later years of his naval career, Tom moved into defence communications and strategic planning, eventually serving as the Defence Secretary's naval spokesman. Since leaving the Navy, he has become a defence commentator and communications consultant. He's also a leadership mentor with the Nautical Institute and writes a weekly defence column for the Daily Telegraph.
Before we begin, a quick reminder that you can support The Brink by subscribing on Substack for the price of a coffee a month. Subscribers get access to the full episodes without any advertisements or that damnable paywall, as well as access to our live monthly Q&A sessions. So you can sign up now at thebrinkpodcast.substack.com.
As ever, if you're enjoying The Brink, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it, and leave a comment. We love to know what you think. And if you're listening on audio, give the podcast 5 stars.
And now we're delighted to present Tom Sharpe on The Brink. We've seen your articles in the Telegraph recently discussing the naval state of affairs in the Middle East. And we thought it would be useful if we could start with a kind of recap as to where you think we are with this situation. What has the UK actually done and deployed in the Middle East, including Cyprus? And then we can maybe talk about what we could do and should do going forward.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a sort of 2-tier effort here, wasn't there? There was quite early movement of aircraft and enablers, both to RAF Akrotiri, but also into Qatar. I think those four Typhoons has now increased. They went out reasonably early in what was fairly obviously an escalating situation. And I think it's important from my perspective to note that the situation was escalating. That was obvious. When it was going to actually start was not obvious. And it's one of these things where there's a lot of hindsight going on here. But the actual start moment on the 28th, I think caught a lot of people by surprise. And if you hear reports from Fifth Fleet in Bahrain of Americans leaving at the rush, it caught a lot of people by surprise. So we had this build up. We had the notion that the escalation was happening. We had the chance for an off ramp and the rhetoric. And during that process, various air assets, of course, some of the F-35s are naval, but they were moved to their the representative, the right places. What we didn't see was the equivalent naval movement. And I think there's a number of reasons for that, which I can come back to if you'd like. But there was definitely a sense that the jets in a defensive posture, that's all we need for now. And everything else got slightly ignored and put on the back burner.
I mean, there's been a lot of talk about HMS Dragon, the Type 45 destroyer, how it's stuck in Portsmouth waiting to deploy. What does a Type 45 deploy actually bring to the fight above and beyond what we had in Cyprus already with the Royal Air Force assets and any ground-based assets we've got there? Why is the Type 45 so important?
I think probably because it can defend against a faster missile set. And it can knock drones down. We saw from HMS Diamond in the Red Sea knocking drones down. I mean, never get complacent, but with a degree of comfort to the point where they could actually shoot a couple down with guns. So, it's a threat. It's a missile threat envelope. We've got a ship that is custom built to sit in a missile threat envelope and defend against it. That should have been out of the door, right from the off. I practiced, or rather I was in PGHQ in the joint headquarters when we put a Type 45 between Hezbollah and Cyprus in 2013. This is not a new thing. And the obviousness of that threat, to my mind, back to my point about the start point wasn't obvious. Everything else around it was. So that destroyer should have been spun up and sent out there early, because the one thing you can't do you can't do any of this from alongside the ammunitioning jetty in Pompey Harbour. You've got to get these things spun up quickly. And so, the 45 by design throws a 200-mile air defense bubble over anything it chooses, whether that's another ship, the aircraft carrier, or an RAF base. It can do all of that. That's its core task as a destroyer. So a better planning somewhere. So the Navy, I know for a fact, offered this up months ago, and a couple of other options which we can come back to. But for some reason, between the naval headquarters and the decision maker, whether that's in the fourth floor of the MOD or the ministers, that message got diluted down to the point where it wasn't needed. Or, and this is the other point, or it's a function of the 30-year terminal decline, and we couldn't send it because we just don't have enough. We all know that this decline has been in place since, well, I call it 30 years. It's actually, from a graphic perspective, longer than that. And eventually, if that graph continues to attenuate down to zero, this is what happens. The balloon goes up. You go to your bag of warships and there's nothing in it. So I think it's a bit of both. I think the two are sort of symbiotic. The reluctance to send it and the sluggishness of that decision-making process was very frustrating to watch. But it's partly a function of how precious these things have now become. And we adhere to these beautiful programs. We lay out lovely long-range programs that achieve all these sort of diplomatic effects, which is all good naval stuff. But we're so wedded to it that when something blows up, we lack the flexibility to then get out the door and deal with that.
Is there just some counterpoints that maybe I could make, and then Jake, obviously, of course, feel free. But I just wonder if perhaps the Iranian response has actually caught everyone out, us in particular, but also I think maybe the Americans and the Israelis as well. I don't think they expected a week in that you'd still be getting drone strikes on Gulf states, that Iran would still be in the fight. I wonder how much they thought it was going to be like Venezuela, where you could go in, take out the leadership on day one, and that would be pretty much the end of it. And certainly during the 12-day war, we didn't see missiles coming towards Cyprus, or indeed the Gulf states, particularly at any scale. Do you think there's some truth in that maybe everyone's just completely underestimated the Iranian regime?
Well, I can tell you with 100% certainty where they would not have been making any of those mistakes or any of those underestimations, and that's in the planning cell in CENTCOM, because I went there every month for 3 years to help with this exact plan. Now I'm out of date on that, a lot of that information, but the principles remain the same, and we absolutely war gamed all of these scenarios to death. So a little bit of a light effort, like the 12-day war, a little bit of, the odd barrage kind of to this. And actually much beyond this, what we called hard and fast, which is where they literally go with everything they have as fast as they can. Now, they haven't done that. And I think that's partly because they've been suppressed to the extent where they can't. But the idea that this could spread regionally really should not have come as a surprise to anyone in the Pentagon or the White House. But we started off by talking about how communications between our Navy and our headquarters and our politicians broke down here. If it wasn't clear to the decision makers in the Pentagon and the White House that this could escalate the way it has, then that's in exactly the same kind of breakdown. It's a failure for those military planners to walk in with this big plan, which immediately turns everyone off, as a sort of J5 operational planner, no one wants to read that. They want to run out the door and bomb up and go and shoot some people. And you're there as a planner going, do you want to read this before? No, and so it's classic sort of J5 frustration as the operators run out the door and kick indoors and then get surprised when they start shooting back. So no, if this was a surprise, then that's a failure of communications on the American side, no question.
I mean, it's just there's so many things I want to ask you about all this as a layman. But just to pick out a few details. In one of your columns recently, you talked about how our only working attack submarine, HMS Anson, recently sailed through the Middle East, where all these troops were building up, American troops, and carried on down to Australia for some exercises with AUKUS. We think it's coming back now, but we don't know for certain. Also, from what you're saying, it seems like there was from the inside I think you used the word sluggish decision making in terms of the high command in deploying naval assets to the region. What do you think could we have deployed, whether the submarine or other assets? And what do you think the sluggishness in regard to their deployment, what ill effect has it led us to sustain in the region?
Yeah, I mean, there are a handful of things we could have done more quickly. The 45 was one, we've discussed that. The submarine should never have gone out of the Gulf of Oman, in my view. Again, I'm being slightly wise after the event here because we didn't know when this was going to start. But an A-boat, an Astute-class submarine in the Gulf of Oman, plugging into the Abraham Lincoln Strike Group there and doing what our submarines and their Virginia-class submarines are so good at would be absolutely invaluable. And for just in intelligence terms, and freeing up US submarines to do other stuff. So, for example, when that one went down to Sri Lanka to engage the Dima, the Iranian ship, the Dima, it's that kind of stuff. And that is a level of special relationship mill-to-mill planning that really very few can offer. And we should have been, I think, very quick to do that. And critically, those A-boats are our best strike asset by a distance. So if we get hit and someone gets killed, or there's a major strike on a British base, I mean, in Bahrain, our headquarters there was 100 yards from that first missile strike. What if that had worked? I mean, God forbid, but if that had worked out differently, you need something there to offer options, which is the naval business, right, of offering retaliation options, and the submarine is the best bet for that. So again, you call up the Aussies and you go, mate, I'm sorry, I know we're doing really good AUKUS stuff, but we need that boat back. And by the way, do you want to send a couple of people on it? Because there's no better preparation. So the submarine, so 45 is one, the submarine is the other. And I said that not to be that guy, but I did say that, right off the bat. The third one that really raised its head as an obvious conversation point is the aircraft carrier. Again, carrier strike group, right? I mean, the clue's in the title. And we just seem to be endlessly relinquishing opportunities to use it in that role. We did it with the Houthis a number of times. It was going to go in February 24, and then unfortunately the prop broke, and blah blah blah. But then when Op High,
the Prince of Wales.
Yes, that's right. Sorry, no, I think that was QE actually. It was right. QE that was going to go in February 24. Her prop broke, handed everything to Prince of Wales, and then she's been the sort of main effort ever since. But Prince of Wales, they could have stopped as part of Op High Mast, the global trip last year. And I think there's something in the Foreign Office maybe that doesn't understand the American mentality. There's a problem, get the carrier there, and we'll work out what to do en route. But back to my previous point, you can't do it if it's alongside in Portsmouth Harbour. So now they have to prioritize between that and the big operation that's about to go, NATO-led operation that's going to be in the High North. A real, strategic planning conundrum, which the Navy planners will be damning the system for putting them into that corner. Because they're you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. But the carrier's utility is quite obvious in this case. It goes to the Eastern Mediterranean, and it takes the F-35s that are currently flying out of Akrotiri, and it takes them on board. And that serves a number of purposes. Firstly, the carrier is better at maintaining those jets than Akrotiri. It's a very technical thing to do with the way they order and their store systems. But essentially, RAF Marham has it, the carriers have it, Akrotiri doesn't. And we may get to a point, if this goes on for weeks, where the F-35s and Akrotiri have to come back, because it's a complex bird and it needs constant rotation. So you put the carrier there, you put the jets on the carrier, happy days. And then, of course, you can bring the carrier closer to the threat. And that shortens sortie times, saves on fuel, et cetera, et cetera. And it is what the carrier is for. So that, I think, should definitely be a conversation that balanced against whatever's going to happen in the high north and the strategic importance of that. So that, let's see how that plays out. And then there's a couple of other bits and pieces. RFA Lyme Bay is currently in Gibraltar. Sheaves had extended, so that's a Bay class landing ship, big deck at the back. Very useful for non-combatant evacuations and that kind of thing. Forms part of the amphibious package, the sort of the rear echelon of the amphibious package back when we had one of those. Very, very valuable multi-purpose ship. Was at extended readiness alongside in Gibraltar as an in-year cost savings measure, of course, that she is now ramping up. She needs to get to sea and be ready to evacuate large numbers of British citizens, should that be needed. And the carrier could also do that as well, of course. And then the fifth part, the final part, is our mine countermeasures capability. I mean, only as if it wasn't sort of, the timing wasn't unfortunate enough, 2 days ago, the last of the 4 that we had in the Gulf ended up back in the UK on the back of a heavy lift ship. You couldn't make this timing up. But we do have flyaway capabilities, remotely operated capabilities that we need to integrate with the US and the French, and be ready to fly into the Strait of Hormuz and conduct mine clearance there, should that be needed. So there's a bunch of naval maritime stuff. We got the Wildcat helicopters; they can shoot down drones. We've got Crow's Nest, which is our airborne early warning helicopter. That's heading out there now. So all these things can happen. I just think they probably should have happened more quickly.
I mean, it sounds like we've got a reduced pool of things to deploy. Woefully reduced in my view, and it sounds like from the tone of your commentary you agree with that. Woefully reduced. We've got Royal Navy officers, sailors cursing the system, you said, but what you really mean is that we haven't got enough stuff to deploy for the jobs that we've got. We can't protect both the RAF base in Cyprus and keep the Strait of Hormuz open, for example. It's an either-or thing. And the stuff that we have got, we haven't deployed into the region, in Gibraltar, in Portsmouth, elsewhere. I mean, just from the outside, it seems pretty woeful and embarrassing.
Yeah, I think it is embarrassing. The stuff we have is really good, and of course the people we have that run this stuff are still brilliant. And we must protect them and their reputation and their the way they go about their business. But everything is just one layer thick. Everything is one brick thick, to use that expression, and so if you and we also, I mean, I suppose, got to remember this is no one's been shot yet. We haven't sustained any losses, so we're really struggling in a semi-benign peacetime environment. I mean, the Eastern Mediterranean for the 45 will not be. It's not like sitting at the bottom of the Red Sea with Houthis firing at you every day, and we're struggling there. So what happens when we lose assets? And we just haven't thought that way for a long time. Again, the Navy has. That's their business, and the Navy is aware that when things heat up at sea, they heat up very fast, and you have the potential to lose hundreds of people in minutes. And that change, and every Navy in the world is aware of that. That's just a function of maritime warfare. It goes from 0 to 100% in the blink of an eye. But getting that message through a system that is essentially out of cash, and really, the Navy stuff. And the final point on this is that we're so good at it. We're our own worst enemy. Through all this gradual decline, we've been so good at going, yes, Minister, getting something out of the door and achieving operational effect and coming back and going, look how well we did. So it's no wonder no one really got the message as to how kind of thin this was all becoming. You can see why that message could be lost when you're focusing on welfare or education or all these things that that are very easy for the general public, the voting public, to see and recognize and understand, against this military thing that's a bit nasty, and it's just somewhere else. You can see why it happened. It doesn't make it right, but you can see why it happened.
I mean, look, our defense budget is the 5th biggest in the world. And it's certainly bigger than Israel's, who managed to get 200 ship sorties in the air for their air force. We couldn't come close to that. And we know that, of course, in 2010, the decision was made to put the nuclear budget under the defense budget, as well as pensions, which both fudged the figures a little bit. But where's the money going? Like, we've got the 5th biggest budget in the world, and yet we can't even get 2 ships down to the Gulf. Where's the money going?
Yeah, and I think, you're right. I mean, if you take away nuclear, we're at 1.5% of GDP on defense or something like that. But it is still a sizable sum of cash. But we are unbelievably wasteful. I mean, it's off the scale. Look at Ajax, £6.3 billion for no operationally available vehicles, and that's been going on for years. Wedgetail.
That's the armored vehicle that sent everyone deaf when they tried to use it.
That's right, vibrations and all sorts of teething problems for a tracked vehicle that shouldn't really be that difficult. But it's gold plating it at every stage that causes these problems. Wedgetail, which is the RAF's new airborne early surveillance aircraft that replaced the one with a disc. The Smarty on the back, that is about to become the new Ajax in terms of wastefulness and scandal. We've had 15 reviews into defense procurement since 1990, all heavily studied, all learned documents, all proposing solutions, none of which have worked. Not even close, because we're talking about a cultural problem here, a cultural rot that leads to these sort of bloated procurement processes, quite often led by senior military officers who pursue that, the shiny bauble with full vigor. And this is where it gets really, controversial. But there's pretty clear evidence of it. It's sometimes those senior officers are pursuing those very expensive options because they have half an eye on what's next for them once they've left the military. I mean, that's
you mean in terms of working for defense companies?
Correct. You're so no one ever got fired for hiring IBM, right? And it's the same with BAE. It's the same with the primes. When they ring the mod desk, you take that call. But if you're talking about the smaller companies, which now we absolutely must get better at using. I mean, Ukraine has shown us that for years, right? But we are still finding it difficult. I mean, I'm working very closely with a company right now who are trying to make, it's quite simple, but make the next advanced jet trainer. And they can't penetrate the BAE Boeing sort of cabal that says, no, we'll build you one. It's American, but don't worry about that. We'll put a Union flag on the side and we'll bash the tin in the UK and call it British. And we're sort of, our system is lurching towards them, even on a day when the Prime Minister's launching new schemes to make us more British and make us more resilient and more independent. Even on the same day, we're still pursuing an American solution to a really simple problem that we can fix. So we've got all of these things. It's a long answer to say we're just very, very inefficient when it comes to defense procurement, which is why, I mean, you're right, Israel's strike sortie rate is off the charts. France, perhaps a better comparison because they have blue water aspirations as well as a nuclear deterrent. They also managed to squeeze an air launch deterrent out of their budget. They have more bang for their buck, and I think fundamentally they budget differently. They're not wedded to a yearly cycle that has this sort of overspend, underspend business. And then once they've fixed a program in place, you cannot change that without their defense secretary's sign off. So they ring fence these. And if that means at the start you get a slightly less good capability, then fine. Get it out the door, get it working, iterate it over time, spiral develop, all those good terms. We are really bad at that. We want it to be gold plated from launch. And firstly, it never is. And secondly, that makes it way, way too expensive.
Wow. I mean, it sounds like we've got some serious problems here. I mean, it sounds like we've got, problems in procurement, which you didn't use the word corruption, but if you've got somebody making decisions with half an eye on their future career in the same defence firm that they're trying to get in there through the door, that sounds like a pretty reasonable word to use about it. We've got a top brass that, according to numerous media reports recently, has been at least partially in hock to identity politics. There was that famous example of the RAF found to be discriminating against white men in its recruitment because it's trying to satisfy diversity targets. We've got ministers who try to use as much money as possible towards the welfare budget rather than towards defence. Does this all boil down to the fact that nobody ever really thinks that we're ever going to have to use our armed forces?
Yeah. That's it. It's someone else's problem. I mean, I can't write anything about the Royal Navy in the Telegraph. And I did the stats on this a while back. I'd need to update them, but roughly 30% of the comments. So you could be writing about the Mediterranean, you could be writing about the Gulf or the High North. 30% of the comments would be why aren't our Navy in the Channel? That is the immediate problem. Like okay, so it comes with a bit of a Telegraph sort of
because of the small boats. I mean.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And so that's an interesting conversation to be had, and there's a naval role there. My point is that people don't see a role specifically, especially for the Navy, unless it's immediate, i.e. we're under attack. And I did a podcast for Sky not that long ago called The War Game, where this attack materialized. It went from interfering with critical undersea infrastructure and transatlantic cables, which, by the way, happens every day. And we are under attack every day from Russia, no question about it. But it transitioned into, what we would recognize as an attack, i.e. a missile from a submarine in the North Atlantic hitting Faslane, let's just say. And it was extraordinary how, even in the room of professionals who've dealt with this all their lives, the shift that took place in our thinking as this took place. And then, of course, we looked in the golf bag and realized that between our wedges and our putter and our driver, which is the deterrent, we've got a massive hole, and that's what really needs to be filled. So we've got
and no balls left, and no balls left to use either.
Yeah, they're all in the long grass or been stolen by someone else. We've got to rethink. We've got to recalibrate here, and historically, that only happens when the worst thing happens. And I think the point I try and make as often as I can, but it's just so obviously common sense, is that it's better to spend a bit more now. Let's just say 5%. I know percentage of GDP is a clunky metric, whatever. Let's just say 5% now, because if you don't, the likelihood of you ending up in a proper war and that jumping to 30% goes up. It's just obvious. Ukraine's at 30% now, maybe even more. So, and with the global situation seemingly deteriorating, the better prepared we are, the less likely we are to A, get involved in the first place, but B, then act decisively when we do. And I don't understand why the current system is finding that so hard to see, because it's so obvious.
But isn't there a corollary to that? So if we go to 5%, that's all well and good. But obviously, we've just discussed some of the systemic problems that are there. It's going to need to come hand in hand with procurement reform, maybe even civil service reform in the MOD. And certainly, perhaps I would suggest a change in the way that the three services end up in a funding bun fight every time there's a defence review. Do you think that's even practicable?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. More money is not the only solution here. In fact, a big chunk of cash could make it worse, because, as you've just said, the first thing the services will do is get their knives out. So you've got to have more money. That's fundamental. But you've got to spend it better. Back to the thing we discussed about how you procure and how you shape the business of defence. And the military, the MSHQ, the Military Strategic Headquarters, was supposed to be part of that process. Really defining what effect do you want, and therefore what capability do you latch onto that, rather than just defaulting to, the answer is 6 Typhoon and a frigate. Sorry, what was the question again? Which is the way we've sort of so often done it. So yeah, you've got more money, you've got to spend it better, and we need more people, because without that, then this whole thing is moot. And again, not to go on about the Navy, but one of the reasons we're in the frigate gap we've got now is we slowed down the rate of the new build frigates, there was a number of reasons for that. Mainly, a lot of them were political, but the Navy didn't push back because they realized they didn't have the people. So you've got to do all these things together. And I think they're symbiotic. Yeah, I think if you have a well-founded, a well-run business, people are more likely to join it than if they see one that isn't well-run, or perhaps putting people in harm's way unnecessary, or dare I say it, prosecuting them years down the line. And none of this is helpful in the macro business of recruit and retain. And I think they're all symbiotic. So you're absolutely right. We can't just throw money at this. It's got to be coherent. But it does start with money. If you don't have that, then you're just kind of constantly trying to wring more out of the little money you have, and that's where we are. And I think that also lends itself to some of the really bad behaviors. I think some of the inter-service bad behaviors are a function of not ever having any cash. It's a minor point, but I was part of a project team that led the formation of the new support base in Bahrain. It was an offer by the King of Bahrain in 2012 for some cash to build a support facility there to bake in the Navy. He loved the fact that the Navy was there. They were going to call it HMS Jafar, which was the name of the base back in the 60s. It was all, no one knew what to do with this extra money. I mean, it was literally going from PGHQ into the MOD and saying, we've got spare cash here, was like a sort of but we've just done an analysis of that. And all we really need is a little headquarters building. We don't need any of this. And we're going, yeah, but we have to use it, or we're going to cause some diplomatic embarrassment. So let's find a way. And it was almost like you were talking another language. So, this is part of the reason why the inter-service blades come out so readily, is because no one's ever had any cash. And so that, again, it does start and finish with more money, but there's quite a lot more to it than that.
No, I was going to say I'd missed the Navy's 4-yearly threat to can the Royal Marines if we ever fix this. That's always an entertaining one. So, Tom, you wrote, I thought, a great piece about the Battle of the Strait of Hormuz coming up in the Iran war. That was in the Telegraph yesterday, I think. And I'd be interested on your views on what you think we can actually add as the Brits in this, because you've got 2 American carrier groups, pretty capable outfits. I'm sure you'd agree. What do you think the British would actually add to that fight? Because clearly the biggest danger in this war is the economic global threat and the potential for a crash if it goes to 150 plus dollars per barrel. So what does the UK bring to this?
If you need to open the Straits of Hormuz, and it's been closed with relatively little effort by the Iranians so far. They surged, I think they did about 7 strikes a week ago. Since then, it's been 1 or 2 a day. It's almost the sort of Houthi model. Just keep them ticking over and threatening everyone on the radio. And the Strait have effectively shut. There's a couple of Iranian ships making it out, and a couple of others, sort of just running the gauntlet and hoping for the best. But basically, it's shut. If you want to open that, I mean, and I get asked a lot how long it would take and how much effort, but having seen the threat types there, and it's the ballistic missiles that we know, it's the fast attack craft, of which they have thousands, maybe 2,500 plus. And I'm not talking about vessels moored up in a lagoon here that could be bombed. These are in people's garages, and they all. So there's the fast attack craft threat. There's the mini submarine threat, the Gadir mini submarine, which is a honking bit of kit that sits around in the Strait of Hormuz, hovering into tide on its little impeller. So it's basically invisible, and it has heavyweight torpedoes, and it's there to kill ships. That's its only job. And then the mine threat. So you've got these 4 things, and all we've seen really so far is a little bit of the missile threat. So if you want to go in there and assure the shipping, assure ships that they can get through safely, you've either got to attrit all 4 of those threats down to very close to 0, or you've got to go in there with a heavy air defense posture, and then immediately you're into a sustainability problem. For example, off the Bab el-Mandeb at the bottom of the Red Sea, during Operation Prosperity Guardian, the US Navy had between 6 and 12 Arleigh Burke destroyers there to sit in missile boxes and make sure the ships could get past safely. And we, through HMS Diamond and one of our Type 23s, we plugged in and out of that architecture. Aspides was the EU equivalent, and they did a more sort of traditional escorting route where they would put a warship alongside 2 or 3 heavies, and they would go through. The best solution is where you have a bit of both. But you can already see, I mean, the kill zone in the Bab el-Mandeb is about 50 nautical miles. In the Strait of Hormuz, it's 250, and actually it goes all the way up the Gulf. So you're very, very quickly running up against numbers of ships, and the US don't have enough, in my view. They've got 8 by the Abraham Lincoln, 8 destroyers this is, and the 8 by that, of which 3 are allocated to that carrier. And they've got another 7 in the Eastern Med, of which 3 are allocated to the Ford. Now, the USS Ford yesterday appeared on satellite pictures having gone through Suez. So the good news is the US
That's
Navy
a massive aircraft carrier.
the Ford is the world's largest aircraft carrier. She is now through Suez. So the US Navy planning team agree with me, which is extremely flattering, that they don't have enough ships for this task. In which case, anyone who has a ship that can do it becomes valuable. And the 45 can exist in that high threat environment in the Straits of Hormuz. It wouldn't be much fun, just like it wasn't in the Bab el-Mandeb in the Red Sea, but it can do it. And there aren't too many countries with ships that could do it, and so even fewer that would even consider it. So at this point, our HMS Daring, alone and unafraid, heading eventually to the Mediterranean. Now, again, another strategic decision. What's more important now? Sitting off Akrotiri and offering protection there, or going through Suez and helping out with what is becoming a global strategic problem. So those are decisions that are going to have to be made, and I think the 45 can really do that. And if you put a couple of wildcats on the back with Martlet, Martlet is the system that is pretty good at shooting down drones. You are now in the fight, and of course the Sea Viper missile system can defeat drones and low-end ballistic missile threats. So it's valuable. I think that's really important, particularly in an environment where the US are seriously talking about putting the 82nd Airborne, ashore in Iran. I mean, I'm really struggling with what they would do and how they would also be sustained. But that's, this is how seriously everyone is taking the problem in Hormuz right now. So we should be doing everything we can to contribute.
And where does Russia and China come into this? Because you mentioned in one of your recent columns that the Chinese may be involved possibly with protecting some of the shipping against the Iranians, who are their allies.
Yeah, China has 3 warships there. All year round. Occasionally there's 6 as they hand over, but by and large 3 destroyers in a task group out there. And it's not clear what their role is, but you can definitely see a situation where they come in here and they say, we'll escort ships, knowing that they won't get shot at. Because they're in Tehran, right? And they're helping with command and control, they're helping with satellite intelligence, which is vital to knowing where the carriers are. China are absolutely embedded in this. So you can see a situation where they send their warships in to save the day and essentially go, we're doing what the mighty US Navy could not. I mean, I think that would be a source of embarrassment. Probably one step back from that is that they're just there hoovering up intelligence, complicating the surface picture, right? Because the minute there's a Chinese warship anywhere near you, you're going to have to regulate what you can or can't do with your ships and aircraft. The transmissions, the emissions you give out, all of that needs to be carefully choreographed, particularly if there's a Russian intelligence gathering ship nearby. You're going to have to watch that. And you can work around all these things. It's just a nuisance, and it takes longer and it takes more effort. So yeah, I think they've got a role. I think they've got a role to play here. Absolutely no question. The other I think sort of interesting point about China and perhaps India and what they're doing there, and Iranian ships still going out through the Strait, is that's actually quite good news in some respects, because it makes it less likely that Iran will use the free floating mine threat. So a lot of their 5,000 plus mines are literally horned World War II mines. They have fishing vessels with barrels on the back that are cut in half but closed up. And the barrel's open, there's a rail, and they go out the back. And they can get rid of their entire payload in about a minute. So your chances of detecting that and killing it before it is really low. But a lot of these things are free floating, and that threatens everyone. They're totally indiscriminate. So if Iran wants to keep its oil moving out of the Strait at all, and China will definitely want them to keep moving oil out of the Strait at some point, then free floating mines makes that much more dangerous. Then you're into moored mines, putting them in known positions that you would then tell the Chinese ships or the Iranian ships where these positions are. And now it's an intelligence race to try and clear them. So yeah, China's got a key role here, and I don't think we've seen the last of them in the Strait by a long shot.
Right, because the Chinese receive most of Iran's oil at the moment. They're also sitting in Tehran with planners on the same side, and they're suggesting they could protect ships from Tehran. It's a very complicated picture you're describing. It's a sort of 4D chess of alliances, but that's how things work in geopolitics, particularly in the Middle East.
Right. And whilst everyone's firing missiles at each other, you can see why people are worried about this kind of going off track. And I suppose the other point about Chinese and Russian warships nearby is the ever-present threat of miscalculation. What if the Virginia boat goes to, this is hypothetical, but what if it goes to sink an Iranian warship and actually sinks a Chinese one? What have you just done there? So, the threat of miscalculation, all the times I operated in the Strait, which was a lot, happy days, the threat of miscalculation was always there because, again, a small anecdote if you've got time, but I was in the Gulf and a helicopter came off. We were 12.1 miles off the coast of Iran, as we tended to be. An Iranian helicopter came off the land at 200 feet, not transmitting, not answering on the radio, and flying straight at us. And that was a known threat, the low, slow flyer, we called it. And it wouldn't answer on guard, the emergency, it wouldn't answer on any stations. We armed our missile system, keys in, spun them up, and it's on my order to whether or not to engage this thing. And we didn't, for various reasons, mainly because it didn't descend towards us. I think if it had started descending, which it might have done just to have a look, or this sort of civilian helicopter go, oh, there's a warship, let's go and have a look, I would have been within my rights to engage in self-defense. And I didn't. And literally, as it was in the overhead, it came up on the emergency radio going, why are you warning us? Warship, what is your, and it was a rig support vessel with 12 Iranians in the back, civilians off to support an oil rig. On another day, we could have shot that down. And I think I would have been justified in doing so. So miscalculation in that environment where everything is so close and claustrophobic and people are shooting at each other all the time is absolutely very high risk.
And having seen the Iranians up close in that way, are they as incompetent as they've appeared in different ways over the past week or so of hostilities?
Their fast attack craft threat is competent. They practice it a lot. They've done nothing but practice it for 30 odd years. And in fact, ever since they got 1988, when they got absolutely whacked in Operation Praying Mantis, and their regular Navy and Air Force was essentially written down, they went, right, we need to fight another way. And they've been building this very dispersed way of fighting, and that includes command and control. So it's pretty clear that the IRGC and the IRGCN, the Navy part of it, are capable of operating without direct comms from Tehran, because they've practiced this exact scenario. And they also do some quite sophisticated stuff. We knew that there were plans for them to lay mines at night from these fishing boats, but moored in a pattern, in a box, 3-sided box, and then they would storm at you with their fast attack craft, knowing, because they did it all the time. Every time you went in or out, you got rushed by these 20 of these fast attack craft, and you would maneuver in a certain way and get away, and you'd do your warnings, and after time, of course, they know what that looks like, so they would do this and drive you into that minefield.
Wow, so they're testing
That's pretty
it.
sophisticated, right? Of course, that's quite easy to practice, quite hard to do when you've got the US and Israel operating in your overhead with impunity. That's the difference, right? No one can ever practice what that would feel like. Every time you spin up a mobile launcher, is this the last time? Is this the last thing I'm going to do? So there are degrees of competence. It worries me that we've seen nothing of the fast attack craft there, to which they've added uncrewed surface drones. But actually, a lot of the fast inshore attack craft were suicide anyway. They would sit on it full of explosives and drive into you. So there's no difference between that and a drone. Frankly, it's the same threat. It's why when people said the Black Sea is redefining surface warfare, a lot of us who'd operated in the Strait of Hormuz were going, not really. We've been practicing against this for decades. So yeah, it's not competent in the way we would recognize it, but it's rehearsed, it's thought through. The question for me is, how much of this have they got left in the tank? Are they keeping good stuff back, waiting for warships to turn up and going, let's go, and it doesn't matter if we don't survive the day? Or are they absolutely just getting leveled to the point where they can't function? I don't know what the answer to that is in any of these environments, but it's fundamental to knowing, I think, how long this now goes on for.
That's kind of the key to the challenge of analysing all of this, is that you've only got two sources of information: the Iranian regime or CENTCOM or Israeli drone footage, and there's nothing in between. So obviously there's an information war going on, and each side wants you to know what they want you to know. So getting to the truth of where things actually are is far harder than I think in many modern conflicts, because there's just a complete vortex of information that's coming through. But from what we do know, I think, first of all, we've touched on the sheer complexity of warfighting. I think a lot of people think it's like Call of Duty, where it's easy, but obviously the enemy always gets a vote. We've got naval issues, air issues, what happens on the ground at some point. We've spoken about the 82nd Airborne, who knows? I think it's very easy to be extremely critical about strategy not being clear or not going smoothly, but there's a really good reason for that, because in war, even the simplest thing is difficult, as I believe Clausewitz once wrote. So what's your take on where this goes strategically? And I've just told you all the problems and all the vortex information, and now I've put you on the spot to ask you what you think. But with your many years of military experience, what does your instinct tell you from what we've got in front of us at the moment?
I occasionally hear noises out of Washington that make me think we're going for a quick off ramp. So we've achieved regime change. In inverted commas. Personally, I don't think we have. We've just shifted it around. That package is still there, and the new guy doesn't seem to be showing any signs of softening, although that's in its very early days. So let's see how that plays out. But you can see another hit on the nuclear strikes. You can see a hit on the oil infrastructure, that's sort of the energy infrastructure that's going on now, and then the change of regime, personnel, and call that, and then maybe force through some shipping through Hormuz. Literally just put everything in there in an unsustainable fashion, but get a dozen ships through and a dozen ships back out, and go, look, it's safe, and then walk away going, we won this. It's another war. It's another war of one. There are so many sort of falsehoods in that, and so many short-term elements to it, that I just hope that's not the case. But you also know that when it comes to the regime itself, Israel and America are not going to be totally aligned on this. It's pretty clear what Israel wants. What does Donald Trump want, and what has he wanted from this all along? I mean, the control of oil and the movement of oil around the world is very clearly in his sight. Venezuela, perhaps Cuba in the future, the way he's managing sanctioned oil in and out of Russia, he sees this as very fundamental. So, but he's not declaring that. The write down of their ballistic missile capability, nuclear, which is interesting because they obliterated their words last June. But we're going to have to obliterate that again. What is the end state? And I'm not ducking the question here. It's because I don't know the answer, because unless you know what the end state is, it's impossible to know how long this goes on for. And then add to that the missile conundrum, let's just call it that, where we don't actually know who's got what left both ways, and whether or not Iran is firing slowly because they're choosing to or because they have to. So it's like a sort of the worst simultaneous equation ever. And unless you can resolve it, you can't say how long it's going to last. But My instinct is that this will run on for quite a few weeks now, and if the US stick with their intent to reopen the strait and get shipping flowing, then I see that as a 4 to 6 week problem. That's how long I think it's going to take to get the threat there down to the point where you can now move ships in and out without a huge convoy effort. So you've got to reduce the threat to the level where you can sustain it with the warships they have, which, as I've already said, isn't perhaps enough. And so I think that's a 4 to 6 week effort. Now I look forward to being proven entirely wrong over the next 48 hours. Only because I think there are you hear these noises that sound a little bit like an off-ramp sort of being thrown out in Washington, and you go, are we about to suddenly diverge into another reality?
Well, of course, there's that global inflationary crisis that'll come if it does last that long. Oil prices are already over $100. Another 4 to 6 weeks, I think, would be catastrophic and make this war incredibly unpopular. So the political factor, of course, will come into it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this really comes to the nub of the thing. No one knows what Donald Trump is thinking or what he's going to do, including his closest allies, or ostensibly his closest allies. I mean, you alluded to that when we talked about how Britain knew there was forces building up in the region. We knew something was going to kick off. We didn't know when. Now, under a different president and a different prime minister, I would suggest, we probably would know what was going to happen, because the Americans would be planning with us, or at least telling us, giving us a heads up so that we could get our ducks in a row as well. So I suppose the essential question that's torturing a lot of people at the moment is, what should Britain's role in this have been from the beginning? What should it be now? This is something that Andrew and I have some difference of opinion on, or difference of analysis on anyway. I suppose there are different levels to it. Should we have allowed the Americans to use Diego Garcia? Should we have flown missions ourselves alongside the Americans, defensive missions more aggressively, tipping into offensive missions? I mean, the line between those two things can be blurred when you're talking about targeting ballistic missile launchers against you. Right. Should we be politically supporting the Americans, with our full chest? Should we be playing the game that Keir Starmer's playing, which is repeating that the UK is not involved and nothing has changed and we're not involved? What's your take? How much should Britain be involved in this fight, do you think? If you've been enjoying the conversation so far, don't panic. To catch the rest of the episode, just head over to our Substack at thebrinkpodcast.co.uk.